Dave Aranda and Joey McGuire. Who has the edge and who has it where? We're talking about this again. This is Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Into another episode of Locked On Baylor. Thank you so much for making it your first listen today and every day. I'm your host, Stuart, and today, you don't often get to see the people who write in the Bible, but today we have that because from Dave Campbell's Texas Football, which around here is the Bible, we have Mr. Carter Yates. Carter, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to talk some football.
Me too. I love talking football, and I usually don't talk it with Longhorns, but look, I've got you here. We're putting that aside, all right, because you wrote an excellent article that came out yesterday about kind of this coaching rivalry, if you can call it that, friendly rivalry. Dave Aranda versus Joey McGuire. Obviously, Joey worked under Dave for a little over a year here at Baylor after taking the job under Matt Rule. So he stuck around in the new regime. He goes over to Tech, and, he's got the place fired up. Baylor, it's not the same, not the same vibe, but it's the same record. And we talked a little bit about this on the show yesterday. I mean, that was basically the whole show. And I didn't want to bring this discussion back, but Carter, you wrote that excellent article, mainly talking about the things off the field and kind of the culture around the team and not necessarily the X's and the O's. So I'm going to just start it here, Carter. If you're in Mack Rhoades' position as the AD at Baylor, we're in year 4 of Dave Aranda. He's brought you a championship in the Big 12 and in the Sugar Bowl. And Joey McGuire just doesn't have a lot of the W's yet, but he is getting the place really into it out in Lubbock. So would you, as the AD at Baylor, be regretting hiring Dave Aranda rather than Joey McGuire, who a lot of the players wanted?
If Baylor had lost that UCF game and not come back from 28 points, I would be hitting the panic button right now if I was Mack Rhoades. Now, we were talking about it before we hit record, but like that win literally saved the season for Baylor. And I think what's interesting about the whole Joey McGuire, Dave Aranda debate is, look, on the field, there's not much of a distinction, right? I mean, Dave Aranda has the better on-field results right now with the 2021 Big 12 championship. But again, a lot of those guys were Matt Rule guys.
Almost all of them, yeah.
That were brought in by a different regime and brought in by Joey McGuire when Joey McGuire was on staff under Matt Rule. And it's interesting because Baylor had a future head coach on its roster, like on its coaching staff. And they chose to go outside hire Dave Aranda and brought him back in. And then that's what happens when, Joey McGuire goes to Texas Tech. And in many ways, this Saturday's game is about between, like I say in the article, what Baylor is now and what Baylor could have been, for better or for worse. And I said for better or for worse because the jury's still out, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's one of those deals where if Baylor wins this game on Saturday, Aranda's 2-0 against Joey McGuire, and McGuire falls to 1-7 on the road in his tenure at Tech. That's kind of a big glaring red flag for him right now. And then you could say Aranda's also got that 2021 Big 12 championship. But if Tech wins this game, there's a lot of sauce with Joey McGuire. There's a lot of good vibes around this program, and we're not a week removed from Baylor being deader than dead, honestly, in the third quarter of UCF. And I really the off-field stuff with Joey McGuire and Dave Aranda is so interesting because both, great guys by all accounts, just completely different personalities.
Yeah.
Not saying one's better, one's worse. It's just different.
Yeah, and you talked about that in your article, mostly, again, the off-field stuff. So, obviously he doesn't have Dave Aranda beat in the wins and losses or in the championships, but where does Joey have the edge? Where has he clearly kind of gone ahead of Aranda in terms of all that goes into a program?
I think part of it is Joe McGuire's a politician, right? I mean, he's a jovial, like slap your back, handshake type of dude. And a lot of that, he's got it beat almost because Joey McGuire is a Texas high school football coach, like through and through. Mm-hmm. He knows the state. He knows all the recruiting pipelines. But then also, At Texas Tech, I'm not even willing to say that Joey McGuire has Dave Aranda beat. I think Texas Tech as an athletic program has Baylor beat right now, because you look at what they're doing off the field, and, you know, they've got $230 million invested for the South End Zone project. You know, they're rebuilding an entire football performance facility. They have the Matador Club for NIL, which gives every player on Texas Tech $25,000 minimum. And that's even if you're a walk-on. And that's not counting like guys like Tyler Shuck before he was injured. Well, not even now that he's injured, he's still got all the money. But Tyler Shuck, Duran Bradley, those guys making six figures, you know, including that $25,000. And you see that Texas Tech, with all this oil money they've got in the Permian Basin, with all these big money donors they got, they want to invest in Joey McGuire, because Joey McGuire is a campaigner, you know? And then on the other side with Baylor, I'm trying to research a lot of their NIL deals, and they're kind of hard to find.
Good luck.
They're few and far between. And part of that's because Baylor's just a more conservative university and, you know, took this approach of we're going to slow roll NIL. But part of that is because Dave Aranda is just not his personality to go out and campaign like that, you know, and campaign for the donors and things of that nature. And another reason is Joey McGuire, while his on-field results aren't beating Dave Aranda, he's 2 years in his tenure, whereas Dave Aranda is 4 years in his tenure. So part of that, what comes into it is like, we're willing to go all in and invest in McGuire, right now. Are we going all in on Aranda yet in year 4? And I think that's kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. That's kind of the issue.
And looking at this game in particular, too, we'll talk in the next segment kind of some more about the two head coaches. But looking at this game, you mentioned some of the big factors on either side. And we talked about this off mic, too. But there's an opening for either of these two teams. I think Texas and Oklahoma are in a class above the rest of the Big 12 right now. We'll learn a lot about OU this Saturday, of course. But after like Kansas State, TCU is a big question mark now. And West Virginia they're upstarts, but they're a question mark. Kansas, after, you know, getting blown out in Austin, becomes kind of a question mark. So is this important for these two teams in their season right now? How big is this game for these two?
Oh, it's huge for both teams. I mean, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. It's almost make or break, because like 2 and 4 this early in the season, both teams that had reasonably high expectations is not a spot you want to be in. Look, this is the Brett Yormark Bowl this week.
Yeah.
Because like Texas and OU are the class of the Big 12 right now, but they're both gone. And in that leaves this vacuum in what everyone was talking about preseason is like, oh, Texas and Oklahoma haven't made a Big 12 championship game. Texas since 2018, Oklahoma for 2 or 3 years now. And so everyone's like, there was this big thought, I feel like, in the Big 12 leadership that like, we've got TCU, we've got Baylor, we've got Texas Tech, and all these programs that are ascending, you know, and ready to take up the mantle. And so far, it hasn't happened yet. Neither for Baylor, neither for Texas Tech. And I just think I think both these programs have an ability to turn it around right now. I think that neither of them are like the season's over, and neither of them are like I'm worried about for the long-term future. But Baylor's dealt with injuries, you know, to Devin Lemire and Blake Shapen that really set them back. Texas Tech had Tyler Shuck go out. They had a weird game in Wyoming. They stumbled in non-conference. It's been a tough start to the year, and this game will kind of show who's ready to take that next step in the Big 12 and really challenge not only this year Texas and Oklahoma, but run into the Texas and Oklahoma less Big 12.
Yes. Yeah, certainly a lot of eyes from the Hateful Eight and the new 4 on this one. That's for sure. In the next segment, we're going to talk a little bit more Dave Aranda, a little bit more Joey McGuire, because that's what we love. But first, we got to talk about eBay Motors, a sponsor for today's show. Now, listen, passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy. And it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, okay? From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. So with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items, exclusions apply. Back to the coach talk, but the good kind of coach talk that we like here as journalists. Some of us more smaller J journalists than others. Anyway, talking about Aranda and Maguire and this little friend-enemy ship they have. So we had talked about the NIL and how Baylor just kind of collectively, no pun intended there, is falling behind. Now, I want to pose this to you. I already made you the Baylor athletic director today. Now I'm going to make you a blue chip football recruit, if that's okay. You get a visit from Dave Aranda. You get a visit from Joey McGuire. Now, we don't know what exactly they're like behind closed doors, but we have seen and heard a lot from their personalities. Do you think the average high school student, high school blue chip recruit is looking to play for someone like Dave Aranda, the more stoic type, or the rev it up pep rally type in Joey McGuire?
Joey McGuire. And
fair.
So funny you bring that up because my colleague Mike Craven at Dave Campbell's, he always talks about this argument. Like, he's also a Dave Aranda guy. I consider myself a Dave Aranda guy. I love hearing Aranda talk, and I think he's, really smart, and I think he makes a lot of great points. I think he's very honest. But like if you're a 16, 17-year-old kid, I mean, Joey McGuire is kind of the man. He's more of like the alpha, like pep rally, like you're talking about, and I think you're kind of seeing that right now play out because Texas Tech is 22nd in recruiting rankings right now. They're actually first in the new look Big 12. So if you go on 247 Sports, you can like do Big 12 rankings, and it shows like even those Pac-12 teams that are coming in next year, like Tech's on top. And then Baylor is 11th right now in those Big 12 rankings. They're kind of falling behind in the class of 2024. And I think, all right, so for all the Baylor fans, this one's going to hurt a little bit.
Oh, no. Here we go.
So Micah Hudson, 5-star wide receiver. This guy is, unbelievable. Baylor was his favorite very early on because Joey McGuire and his staff that was at Baylor offered him and was his first in-state P5 offer. But then once they go to Tech already had the lead. I know, man. But his relationship building and how good of a recruiter he is. And I really think like the Micah Hudson commitment was one of the biggest wins they've had this season. Because you got to think about, they were 0-2.
Yeah.
And there was starting to be like some whispers of like Texas Tech was this dark horse Big 12 pick. And is there really substance to the sauce with Joey McGuire? And Micah Hudson drops his commitment. It's the highest rated recruit ever to go to Texas Tech. And that's like, there you go. This is what he was building here. With Dave Aranda, they lost Austin Novosad at the very last second in the 2023 class. They lost 2 other 4-star commitments. It's hard to see a ton of like wins on the recruiting trail for him right now. Yeah.
And I mean, you actually led me into my next question a little bit with talking about Micah Hudson. I actually did a feature story on him for Dave Campbell's. It aired last week, or last Friday, I should say. And when I asked him, this was before he had committed, he had said, I'm looking at relationships, right? And it was down to UT and Texas Tech, and nothing against your alma mater, but I said, that sounds like Joey McGuire right there. And this kid, for those of you who don't follow the recruiting, he is a 5-star, and he is every bit a Power 5 and possibly Sunday player. He is so explosive and the biggest in Tech's history. And so that kind of leads me to the next question of, is there a sense among the Tech people that this is like the passing of the baton and what this program can become with the things like, the expansion and the NIL and bringing in guys like Micah Hudson? Is Joey McGuire kind of that figurehead to usher in a new era of Texas Tech football?
They're banking on it. They're banking that he is. I mean, the investment from Texas Tech has been crazy, and kind of led by Cody Campbell, who's a former football player there. He's a big time oil and gas guy. And there was actually an interesting story on The Athletic I forget who wrote it, but y'all should check it out. It's literally about all the oil money in the Permian Basin right now that's just flooding into Texas Tech. And part of it was like, remember Joey McGuire on the crane, over the south end zone. Like they're building the, football performance facility. They're building the south end zone. They've got the Matador Club. They're beating Baylor in NIL right now. And it all does kind of hinge on Joey McGuire. He is really kind of the guy they are looking to build it all around. And he's really a dynamic personality that Tech hasn't had in a long time. I mean, you talk about Mike Leach back in the day in the late 2000s, is they kind of built that program in his image. Mm-hmm. Cliff Kingsbury, when he was there, I mean, he was, kind of the hot shot, but he wasn't like this big boisterous,
watered down. Yeah.
He was a little bit watered down, right? And they never enjoyed like crazy success with him.
And if he's watered down, I don't know what Matt Wells is. He is just water.
Exactly. Exactly. He's just straight water.
Yeah.
So it is really kind of like a whiplash effect from Matt Wells to Joey McGuire that they've got going on right now. I think the calls for Texas Tech to be this dark horse Big 12 contender were a little premature for this season. But I think once they figure out, I don't want to say once, if they figure out their offensive line and build that recruiting better and get more guys in the trenches, they're getting the skill position guys right now. And they could really take over in a couple of years.
And just flipping it back to that Baylor side, not as the athletic director here or as a blue chip recruit, but as someone who covers the sport, follows these teams, what needs to be Baylor's priority to get back in the game in terms of recruiting and in terms of NIL? Does it need to be someone that isn't Dave Aranda, or is the money talking enough? What have you seen in terms of how programs are approaching this?
I'm not ready to say this is not possible with Dave Aranda, but what I will say is I was at the Baylor-Utah game in the second game of the season, and I mean, McLean looked kind of sleepy, honestly, when I was there. And if you look at the upper deck, if you took out the student section in the Baylor line, it was kind of 50-50 Baylor and Utah fans.
Yeah, that checks out.
I was sitting there and I was kind of shocked of look, I know the season opening loss to Texas State wasn't good, but it was almost like people weren't giving up, but they were already kind of not as invested as they should have been. And I think part of the issue with Baylor right now is, look, okay, Texas Tech is not in this big metropolis of an area, right? In Lubbock.
Right.
Baylor's in Waco. Like you don't need to have this big time city like in Austin or Dallas, like SMU or Fort Worth, like TCU. But you do have to do some marketing, right? And you do have to find a way to differentiate yourself in the NIL market, because you can't be. Let me think about it. You can't be just about the game anymore, like it used to be. Right. You can't just be I'm the football mind, I'm the football guy.
Here's what I can get you. Here's how you fit in. It's more than that.
You need some relationship building. You need a little bit of pizzazz for these recruits. And I'm that's just the name of the game now. What I think Baylor needs to do in terms of this year, on the football field, here was my thing with Baylor on the football field. So Dave Aranda adapted really well and started hitting the transfer portal because that's what he was kind of crushed for earlier. And he went out and he got Dominic Richardson from Oklahoma State. And he went out and got Keytron Jackson from Arkansas. And what happened was those guys stepped up, but the incumbents weren't rising to the level of play. Monterey Baldwin before the UCF game was kind of invisible.
Yeah. Milk carton. Yeah.
Richard Reese had a very tough start to the season. And part of that's because it was a new offensive line. It's a bit he was getting used to sharing the load, hard to get in a rhythm. But now Richard Reese and Monterey Baldwin are starting to rise their level of play after the UCF game. And then that's going to pair off with those new guys they got. And that's why I think Baylor could be a different team the rest of the season than it could be the team that was second half UCF rather than Utah, Long Island, Texas.
Well, that's definitely what I like to hear. You are definitely enticing us there. So looking more at these two teams outside of their head coaches, Baylor, obviously with the momentum, I mean, both won last weekend, but Baylor with the big comeback and coming back home. You've seen them. Utah wasn't their worst, but pretty bad. Texas State, pretty bad. And the fourth quarter of UCF, very, very good. Mm-hmm. So, and now having seen the team at both ends of the spectrum, do you think this is sustainable, that Baylor could open up a run here, a winning streak here, based off what you saw against UCF in that comeback?
I know it's the boring answer, but it all depends on Blake Shapen's health. I mean, he's actually a true game changer. And like, he had a gutsy performance. Like, he was fun to watch in that second half of the game. And I mean, good for Blake Shapen, because he got a lot of flack last year for the offense not achieving expectations. And part of that was because, he didn't have maybe as good of a season as he wanted, but part of that was just like they didn't have a true number one wide receiver last year. He has improved so much. You saw it in the Texas State game, and you saw it in that UCF game, but they got to keep him healthy. And It's one of those deals, like, I'm holding my breath every time he scrambles. That's part of the thing with Texas Tech too, was like, before Tyler Shutt got hurt, it was like they lost to Roderick Thompson at running back. And it was like, cool, now we've got Taj Brooks and we can like give him all the carries. And instead they kept Taj Brooks's carries the same and gave Tyler Shuck like QB midline draws. And it's like, dude, this guy's had 2 shoulder surgeries that have ended his season. Like, why is he running power draw against Oregon? And he didn't get hurt because of that. He got hurt because he got sacked. So it's not what I'm trying to imply. But that's the thing. Like, Blake Shapen, he's a mobile guy. He can use his legs, extend plays. He's just got to stay healthy, man. And I think really this Texas Tech game, if they win this, now you've got momentum and you show that wasn't a fluke. All right, you show that UCF game wasn't a flash in the pan, because still UCF was on their backup quarterback. Right? Like, there could be a bit of a fluky win, like crazy comeback. You silence those doubters if you go out and win versus Texas Tech, and that sets you up for the rest of the season.
And speaking of Texas Tech, looking at the other side, similar in terms of record to Baylor, both have the same record. I don't think as dramatic as Baylor's lows have been this season. But, again, we talked about a team that had some hype, and you mentioned this in your article, that had some hype going into this season. So with Tech, what is the answer for them to turn it around and for them to go on a run? And how does that start against Baylor on Saturday?
Offensive line has to be better. And this was something in the offseason where they talked about, we got 2 transfers from Western Kentucky with offensive coordinator Bailey Zappi when he was there. We flipped our right tackle and left tackle to where, they're more comfortable playing. And last year it was a deal where they rotated through 3 quarterbacks because they were giving up they gave up like 41 sacks in the season. It was something insane. And in this game, in this season, it hasn't been all that improved. Like, it's been a little better, but not that jump that they needed to be a dark horse Big 12 contender. And you saw that when Baron Morton came in the West Virginia game. Like, the guy went 13 for 37, and he was catching a lot of flack for it. But it was also like, you watch the film and he's running for his life. He's got guys in his face every time he tries to throw the ball. What I saw Tech doing at the Houston game, which was promising, was it looked more like the Zach Kitley Western Kentucky offense that he was running, where it felt like early in the season he was running too much QB run game. He wasn't relying on the running backs as much. Like, Taj Brooks has been a man the last 2 or 3 weeks in the season, and he was invisible in the first few games. Like, he didn't get any carries. But what this offense is doing now is going up tempo and running quick screens and running West Coast offense, because they got to hide that offensive line. That's just kind of a weakness right now. So that's what they need to do offensive side. Keep doing that. On defense, they got to stop letting the quarterback run all over them. The first 3 games they played, the quarterback was the biggest rusher on the other team. And it's like Joey McGuire talked about how even though Tyree Wilson left, he felt better about the defensive front 7 depth than he did in last year. And they were getting some pressure, but they weren't staying consistent in their rush lanes. Like Bo Nix, Andrew Peasley, the Wyoming quarterback, were getting out and like having these big 3rd down conversions that were just killing them on defense. They got to get healthy too. They were missing their middle linebacker for a lot of this time. But I think Tech is a better defense right now. They're just not tackling well and not staying home in the rush lanes.
All right, last thing for me. As a Texan, a Texas football fanatic, should this be a protected rivalry?
This Texas Baylor? Texas Tech Baylor?
Baylor and Tech, yeah.
I think so. The Butt Bowl, man. Yeah.
Yes, brother. Yes.
The
Butt Bowl. It needs to catch on more.
I mean, this is the type of rivalry that, like, look, we got to hold on to these intrastate rivalries.
It's, we know it's not Red River. We know it's not UTA&M. We're not either one of ours biggest rival, but it's awesome, man. The duality of these two programs. I think you got to keep it.
But that's the biggest shame of the realignment is, like, yeah, we'll keep the Texas OU, but we lose the Texas Baylor, or we lose the Texas Tech. And it's like all these student bodies go to high school together, right? And then they all split off and get tribal with their university they go to. And college football is built on regional rivalries. So, yeah, I mean, hell yeah, keep the Butt Bowl forever, if that's my vote.
Yes, keep the Butt Bowl and keep Carter Yates in mind when you are looking for your Texas football coverage. I'm telling you, I retweeted the article today. It's excellent. So follow him along. You see his Twitter @ down there. That's at Carter_Yates16. Carter, tell us a little bit more just before we go here about what else you're covering this year.
Yeah, so we got a team of 4 college football writers. Me, Mike Craven, Ishmael Johnson, our editor. Greg Powers does all our recruiting. You can find all of our coverage at texasfootball.com. We're also on Twitter at DCTF, at DCTFCFB. And I'm really just doing feature writing on all the 13 Texas FBF teams. I'm also on a podcast, Republic of Football, every Wednesday at 2 and every Sunday. So that's all my plugs. That's what I'm doing this season to keep my head down and going to work.
Awesome, Carter. We really appreciate you coming on today. Appreciate the insight into the vast knowledge you have on both these teams. So thank you very much. And thank you guys for making it your first listen today and every day. This has been, always will be, of course, we'll be back tomorrow, Locked On Baylor.